Okay, I think it's really taping you. And I want to introduce Kelly O'Berry. I keep wanting to call you O'Brien.
I know,
another good Irish name, Kelly O'Berry.
Yeah.
And she's here to talk to you about IRB, the Institutional Review Board. And I think this is one of the most important things that we can help you understand better, because it's something that often you wouldn't learn about unless you go on for graduate work. But as teachers, the thing that I keep hoping that you'll be interested in getting into is maybe even some action research in your own classrooms, things like that. And it's really essential to have thought about ethical research habits and how doing things, that they have an impact, even when it seems like it's something that's really low key. And so you are going to be equipped to do research even through the University of Iowa. And I think we have a really tough review process compared to other universities. We have something that really insists on quality and being thoughtful, and so I'm going to let you take it, and I'm sorry, I have another meeting, so I'm going to go to that. But thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
And you guys be sure and ask her tough questions.
Yep, ask me all your hardest.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here to meet you all. And my position is I am the Education and Compliance Specialist, one of them, in the Human Subjects Office. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the Human Subjects Office and IRB, all of those acronyms and names that we use. I want to start by asking, have any of you ever volunteered, been a subject in a research study? Introductory psychology, you sign up, none of you? Oh, okay. And you've probably not ever been involved with conducting research, is that correct? Nobody? Okay, good. So that lets me know where to start. I will ask you, I welcome your questions, but I will ask you to wait, maybe hold on to them until the end, and so I make sure I make it through all of what I'm hoping to talk about. So one of the things we're going to talk about today are some key definitions that will be useful for you in deciding if what you're doing is human subjects research. We'll talk a little bit about how to ask if you're not sure if something is human subjects research. I want you to know a little bit about the review process. I can only tell you a little bit about it in this 50 minutes, but I'd like for you to have an idea of what to expect. We'll talk about some flexibility and some exceptions in the federal regulations for human subjects protections. And then I'm handing out this resource card that even if you're not ready to do research today, you can hang on to that, or I'll show you where to find it on our website. And when you're ready, a lot of the educational offerings and outreach activities and resources that are available to you are indicated on this card. So this cartoon, we have a cartoonist who draws human subjects research-oriented cartoons. So I like to use them in my slides. But this is really what my wish is for anyone who plans to conduct human subjects research. I want you to have a smooth path, smooth ski right down the slope to that finish line, and avoiding all of those little pitfalls that happen along the way. Now, one of the questions that we get asked most often is, here's what I want to do. I have this great idea. Here's what I want to do. Do I need IRB approval for that? And the answer to that question comes directly from a section of the Code of Federal Regulations that was written specifically for human subjects research. And in that section of the code, they define research. They say that it is a systematic investigation that includes research development, testing, and evaluation that's designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. So that sounds exactly like government legalese, doesn't it? You know, what in the world does that mean? And so we take the pieces of that definition apart. First of all, that's systematic investigation. There's a plan for collecting information in a systematic manner. Usually that means collecting the same kinds of information from everybody, or manipulating the environment in the same way to see what happens. So holding things constant, but gathering some same basic information. This research, the definition of research, involves anything that is developmental or testing or evaluation that might be leading up to doing the real research, pilot studies, things on a small scale that maybe you're not planning to publish that, but you need that background information to be able to answer your research question. And actually, the fact that there is a research question, there is some kind of question you're trying to answer, a hypothesis, an idea. You have an idea of what the outcome is going to be in advance, and you're asking this question and trying to answer it by doing this research project. The last thing is that it is designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge, and that's really the clincher. The idea that what you're going to gather will be generalizable to other people, that it will mean something and be of interest to other people, that you will draw some conclusions or make some generalizations based on the information that you collect in the study. Now you'll notice that this definition doesn't say anything about are you planning to publish it or not publish it, or present it at a professional meeting or not. That's because, unfortunately, there is a lot of research that happens that is never published. And I say unfortunately because in the biomedical world, they may be finding things out that should be published that they aren't. So that's not a factor here. Obviously, if you want to publish it or if you want to present it at a professional meeting, somebody may ask you, hey, did you get IRB approval for this, and where is the proof of that? But it's not the deciding factor for what makes something human subjects research and makes it need IRB approval. The regulations kindly go on to define a human subject. And for the most part, it's exactly what you think it is. It's a living individual about whom the investigator obtains some kind of data, either through questionnaires or interviews, some kind of interaction with the subject, or the researcher obtains this data through some sort of intervention, manipulating the environment, giving the subject something, changing something to see what happens, and gathering information about that. So most people think of that when they think of a human subject. A human subject is also a living individual about whom the researcher obtains identifiable private information. So even if the researcher never interacts or does anything that affects the subject directly, if the researcher obtains this identifiable private information, entrance test scores, college entrance exams, and future career choices, or whatever you might do in an educational setting, you might not ever talk to this person, but you might be able to get a data set from somewhere of existing data. And if it has identifying information in it, we would consider you to be doing human subjects research. If it meets that definition, research and use of human subjects, you will need approval from an institutional review board. If you're doing that research as part of your position as a university student or university faculty or staff, the institutional review board has to approve that research before you conduct it. Now, there are lots of things that don't fall into that definition. A literature review, reviewing existing publicly available postings, let's say, on a website or something like that. Those kinds of things may not need IRB approval. The regulations go on to define, and you have a slide with this, what is an intervention, what is an interaction, and I've kind of mentioned those already, so you have that. Now, the University of Iowa has a great umbrella that is called the Human Research Protection Program, or HRPP. This whole program operates under the Office of the Vice President for Research and Economic Development. So we're not affiliated with any college or department or really any other entity here at the university. We really are an independent entity. Within this umbrella, there are offices and committees and boards and core facilities that all have an interest in what we call the research enterprise. They're concerned with some aspect of the fact that this is a research institution, that lots of research happens here. But there are groups or offices in this umbrella that are trying to get funding for research, who are processing grants and contracts, who are promoting the university as a research entity or promoting individual researchers to try to help them get funding. The Institutional Review Board, that I'll tell you about in just a minute, is really kept separate from any of those promotional entities, those offices that are trying to make the university look good so that we can get funding, to try to separate out the review that is intended to protect human subjects, which is what the IRB does, and anybody that might be cheerleading and promoting this as a place that should receive funding, or researchers that should receive funding. And that is mostly because the purpose of the IRB is an independent, autonomous, ethical review board. And the intent is to review all research proposals, not from the perspective of protecting the institution or the researcher, not from the perspective of trying to get funding or promote the obtaining funding, but for the perspective of protecting human subjects, protecting the rights and safety and welfare of the subject. So the University of Iowa has an IRB, has an institutional review board, because we as an institution receive federal funding for research. Any institution that receives federal funding for research has to have an IRB. And so we have one. We follow those regulations. We have this IRB to allow for researchers here to obtain that funding and conduct research. We, however, apply all of those regulations and all of our IRB policies to all research, whether or not it has federal funding. So it could have no funding. You could do research and not have any funding. You could have departmental funding. You could have non-federal funding. And we would still apply the same standards for reviewing your research from the perspective of protecting human subjects. Now you can imagine some research is pretty low risk. Doesn't have as much potential for harming subjects who are participating in the study. Some research that's done here on campus has huge risks to the subjects. And yet all of it can go on because in compliance with those federal regulations, the IRB evaluates both the risk and the potential benefit, not only to the subjects but to society as well. Now there's lots of student research that's very low risk, but also probably mostly only benefits the student to learn how to conduct research. And we're aware of that too. But there is some very risky research that could have great benefits to society, and that still has a favorable risk-benefit ratio and can be approved by the IRB. Each IRB, actually the regulations mandate that each IRB creates their own set of policies and procedures. So there is a lot of variation across boards for how they operate and kind of the policies that they follow or that they ask researchers to follow. I'll also say that, and maybe I have this in my notes somewhere else, but there is an accrediting body that accredits human research protection programs. It's called AHRP, the Association for the Accreditation of Human Research Protection Programs. You can see why we call them AHRP. But our institution, the University of Iowa, was the first academic institution to receive this accreditation across the country. We were the first. And so we have shown that our policies and procedures comply with a certain higher level of standards for protecting human subjects. Now, sometimes in the research perspective, that means we're harder to get approval from, or more persnickety about things. I certainly remember thinking that when I was a researcher. But now that I work on this side, on the regulatory side, I really see the value of it, that the intent always is for the protection of subjects. If you ever participate in a research study as a human subject, you will be glad that there was this board and this body that was responsible for taking a look at the proposed research from the perspective of protecting you. My office, the Human Subjects Office, is the administrative office that supports our 3 IRBs. We have IRB 01 that reviews biomedical research, IRB 02 reviews social and behavioral research, and IRB 03 reviews research that's conducted at the Veterans Administration Hospital or using any kind of Veterans Administration resources. So I am not the IRB. When I meet with you on behalf of the IRB. And the staff in our office that are involved with reviewing research applications work very closely with the board. So they start to know the kinds of things that the board's going to ask for. We separate, so we have specialized staff that review biomedical research, specialized staff that review social and behavioral research. So they get familiar with the kinds of things that these different kinds of researchers do. And we, as you can see, the board specialize. So we want faculty and staff to be involved with the review of your research who are familiar with the kinds of things that you do. There are only a couple of requirements to conduct human subjects research. One of them is to complete an online training program called CITI. Do you have to do that for this class? No?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Actually, maybe I'll show you right now where that is. So on our website, there is a little link that says CITI program. And I will admit, I just looked at this the other day and I cannot hold in my brain what CITI stands for, but it's probably somewhere on our website. This link takes you to the web page, our web page, that tells you instructions for how to complete this online training. Everybody who either submits an application to be the principal investigator of a research or works on a research team has to complete that online training. So if you think you're headed in that direction and you have a couple of free hours, you could go ahead and complete that training, and you only have to do it once. Our requirement here at the University of Iowa is it's a one-time deal. You do have to be familiar with the federal regulations and the University of Iowa policies and procedures that apply to whatever type of research you're doing. So if you're doing something special, let's see, there are policies specifically about recruiting and enrolling children in research. If you're doing that, you should be familiar with what those requirements are. That will help you with the design of your project. That will help you with the proposal, submitting your application to the IRB. It'll help your application go through more smoothly if you're familiar with those policies and procedures. At the University of Iowa, we do allow students, undergraduate and graduate students, to serve as the principal investigator for a research study. So, so you could submit your own application and get IRB approval. You do have to have the necessary training and knowledge, and so the IRB probably wouldn't approve one of you or me to do a study that involved conducting surgery on a patient or a subject. You know, we don't have that background. We wouldn't be able to oversee that kind of research. Interviews, you know, administering a questionnaire that doesn't ask any too sensitive questions, isn't going to raise up any red flags within the subjects. Those kinds of things they'd approve for an undergraduate student. The student does need a faculty advisor. So if you get to the point where you're conducting research, you'll need to identify that advisor. And that advisor will have to also complete the online CITI training if they haven't already. By now, most of them have, but that's a good question to ask up front. We have worked with students who had trouble getting their faculty advisor to complete that online training so that they could submit their application. And so that's a good thing to ask. If you haven't done it already, would you be willing to do it so that you know that in advance? That faculty advisor also signs an assurance document agreeing to oversee and assist and participate in the process for a student researcher to conduct research project. And then obviously you need IRB approval to be able to conduct your research. So it's more than just submitting the application. You need to get the notice back that says you have approval. And probably once a year we have a student who submits the application and then goes off to Tahiti or wherever they go to do their research, forgetting that they just submitted it and they didn't actually get the approval. So that is something that you need to do. I don't have slides about this in this presentation, but if you are planning to do your research off campus, maybe in a school or in another country, there are some additional requirements that you have to have in place. You have some approvals you might need to indicate that you have permission to go into a school to do research, for example. If you're doing research in a school in Iowa, across the state in Iowa, there is a cooperating schools program in the College of Education. There's information about that on our website, so you can Google cooperating schools or do the web search on our webpage and find out more, but I think mostly it just directs you to the College of Education office that assists with that process. Okay, so I told you that people, the most common question they ask is, do I need IRB approval for this? Actually, I can't even answer that question. I'm not really authorized to answer that question. I can give you a pretty good idea usually, but that question can only officially be answered by an institutional review board chair. An IRB chair has the authorization to answer that question. There is a form in our electronic IRB application system. Our system is called Hawk IRB, and there's a form that you can fill out to ask, do I need IRB approval for this? And that form is called the Human Subjects Research Determination Form, or HSRD form. And I'll apologize now for all the acronyms we use, but the names of things are so long that we end up making acronyms for them. If you have any doubt about whether your study meets that definition of human subjects research that we talked about before, it's a good idea to ask if you need IRB approval. We have had this form in our application system since about 2010. It's been a while since I looked at the numbers, but definitely a lot of them are, the answer is no, you don't need IRB approval. Quite a few of them, the answer is yes, you would need IRB approval if you're going to do this. Usually the chair reviews these question forms very quickly, 24 or 48 hours. You'll get some kind of response back. You may not get an answer because the chair might have more questions about what you're planning to do, but the form is very short. I think it's 4 or 5 sections that guide you through telling the chair what he or she would need to know to be able to answer your question if you need IRB approval for this. If it's not human subjects research, you will get an email that tells you that a determination memo has been attached to your form. That memo will say, as long as you do exactly what you said you were going to do, you don't need IRB approval for this. If the chair feels like it needs IRB approval, that it meets the definition of human subjects research, then Hawk IRB system, that electronic system, will automatically start a new project application for you. It's already populated with some of the answers that you put into your HSRD form. You just have to finish filling it out and submitting it. Or occasionally, maybe more often than I think, once the researcher finds out they would need IRB approval for that, they decide they don't want to do it. Sometimes the chair can help a researcher with, if you just don't collect this, or if you just do it a little bit differently, maybe you wouldn't need IRB approval. And so there is some consulting that happens along that line. But it's good to ask. Definitely ask before you do it. But ask up front so that you have time then to get IRB approval if you need it. This is another cartoon, a possible theory about how IRBs got started. The guy at the top of the cliff pushes the rock. The researcher at the bottom is getting ready to take notes on his tablet. And the guy on rock falls on the subject. And the researcher at the top says, ugh, we may need something to protect research subjects. And the guy at the bottom agrees, so they give him an IRB umbrella. Hopefully the IRB is a little more protective of human subjects than that umbrella is going to be for that boulder coming down. So now I want to take a little bit of time to talk to you about the process. When you know you need IRB approval, what to expect from that process. You can find, if you haven't been there before, you can find our website using the A to Z search on the UI web page. You can find us either under Human Subjects Office or Institutional Review Board. I don't think IRB is in there, but Human Subjects Office spelled out or Institutional Review Board spelled out. It may come up if you just Google it too. But if you are asking for IRB approval, you will need to prepare and submit a new project application form in the electronic IRB application system. And actually, I should just start every presentation with, my name is Kelly O'Berry, and it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get IRB approval, because really that's the other question that we get asked the most often, how long is it going to take? And usually that's longer than you would think. I will tell you that it can take less time than that. It most definitely can take more time than that. And a lot of factors affect the length of time it takes to get IRB approval. One big one, for at least, especially for social and behavioral research, is when you submit your application. So for social and behavioral research, there's this lovely bell curve each semester with the number of applications that get submitted. Beginning of the semester, it's very quiet. That's a great time to submit your application. Middle of the semester, everybody's freaking out. Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to go leave at the end of the semester and go do my research, or I need to finish my project by the end of the semester. Holy cow. So everybody submits in that middle time, and then it tapers off at the end of each semester. Summer, kind of the same thing, only as faculty members finally have time to do their own research, and so there's that same kind of curve. There's lots of applications submitted kind of as the summer gets going. So it's a good thing to know about that time frame, but also one of the biggest factors that affects how long it takes to get IRB approval is the quality of the application that you submit. And it's hard because, well, if you do it, it's going to be your first time submitting an application. So it's really good to find a faculty advisor that's done that before that can help you with that process, since it'll be your first time. And for most student research, you do it once. You submit one application, that's your learning curve, and there's a huge learning curve on preparing and submitting IRB applications. But it can take, a couple weeks. The other thing that affects the length of time it takes for your application is how quickly, so the IRB at any point can send the application back to you with questions or requests for additional information or clarification about your plans. And it's at that point that if it comes back to you and it sits for a month, that makes your application review time take that much longer. And so the faster you reply and complete those, provide additional information or answer questions, can definitely speed along the IRB review process. There are several different levels of review that an application goes through when it comes into our office, and so there's some different levels of staff review before the application goes either to an IRB chair or to the full board, to the full IRB, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. So this is one of the areas where there is some flexibility in the federal regulations. And the University of Iowa IRB believes in utilizing any of that flexibility that's available to us. And one area depends on the level of risk to subjects for participating in a research study. And if the study is considered to be more than minimal risk, and the regulations don't define what more than minimal risk is, but they do define what would count as minimal risk. And that is when the likelihood of harm and the degree of harm are no greater than what the subject would encounter in their everyday life. That is the definition of minimal risk. If the IRB determines, if the chair determines that the study is more than minimal risk, it does have to go to the full convened board. The regulations have tons of requirements for what that means, how the board operates, how many people need to be present, that there need to be scientists and people with a non-scientific background present at the meeting. They have to take notes. They have to provide minutes that describe all the controverted issues that are discussed in the meeting. So there's all kinds of requirements for that board meeting. If the study is not more than minimal risk, it can qualify for expedited review. Now, you've probably heard the word expedited, right? And it means, anybody?
Really quickly.
Faster, right, quickly, very fast. But not to the federal regulations for human subjects protections, unfortunately. That is a very poorly named type of review process. So in our regulations that we follow for protecting human subjects. Expedited review means that it can be conducted by a single person, an IRB chair or someone designated by the chair to conduct that review process. Now, researchers often look at that and think, ooh, I really want that expedited review. But unfortunately, expedited doesn't necessarily refer to the speed of the review. It really refers to the fact that a single person can review it rather than sending it to the full board. Now, sometimes that is faster, but not always. So it's important to keep that in mind. There's a list. There's a link to it from the federal regulations. There's a list of types of research that can qualify for expedited review. But if that single reviewer has any concerns about the study design, the oversight capability of the researcher, any reason that they couldn't approve that project, that single person cannot by themselves disapprove a project. If they can't approve it, they can send it to the full board for more eyes and more reviewers to look at it, but they can't just disapprove it by themselves. And actually, I should say that the full board does not disapprove research very often. Usually, the focus is on trying to help the researcher do what they want to do. Occasionally, the researcher will propose something that doesn't comply with federal regulations or IRB policies, and so the IRB might suggest some changes in the design to be compliant. But it's unusual that the board just flat out disapproves some kind of research. The last type of review is exempt status, which really still happens under expedited review. A single IRB chair can review this. Again, the term is a little confusing. It's exempt, but it's not exempt from submitting an application. You still have to submit an application for somebody to say it is exempt. But once it's exempt, if the IRB feels that it meets one of those, it falls into one of those 6 categories of research that qualify for exempt status, then it doesn't have to meet some other requirements. So there's one requirement for research, that the IRB has to re-review the project every year, once a year at least. Can review it more often than that, but not any more than a year. So if the research goes on for 5 years, every year the researcher has to submit a continuing review application. Exempt research is exempt from that. Doesn't have to submit that continuing review. Exempt research is exempt from some of the requirements for informed consent. They don't have to provide all of the basic information that's required for other research. And I think one of you might have asked a question about exempt. So hopefully that answered that question, but we can talk more about that in just a minute if you have questions. Once you've completed that process, you will receive an email, excuse me, from the IRB indicating that you have approval. Like I said before, you want to make sure you have that email before you start. Then you're approved to conduct the research exactly as you described it. Nothing more. So you wouldn't do extra stuff that you didn't describe. Nothing less. So you can't just decide on your own, oh, I guess I won't administer these 5 questionnaires, or I'm going to do something completely different. You do have to do the study as you proposed it. Now, if something changes, that's fine. You just need to submit a modification form and get IRB approval to change something about the study design. And like I said before, the federal regulations require re-review at least once a year. The last requirement for when you conduct research is to close the study when you're done. You need IRB approval to interact with subjects or do any kind of intervention or interaction, or to work with identified data. So if you collect your data with any kind of identifiers, name, address, date of birth, any other kind of dates and symbols that are associated with that subject, you need IRB approval as long as you're still working with those data. For a lot of social and behavioral research, you don't really need a lot of that information. You may not need an ID code that's linked to any identifying information, and then you could just have coded data that would not have any identifiers. Once you've gathered it all and you know you're done, you're working with de-identified, unidentifiable data. You don't need IRB approval for that, so you could potentially close the project. But definitely before you leave the university, you need to close the project. There are some requirements for record keeping, that some records need to be kept here, so if that, for a minimum of 3 years, so if that exceeds your time frame here, you need to leave those records here with your faculty advisor. I do want to talk a little bit about this exception from having IRB approval for course-related projects. So if you're in a research methods course, you're learning how to conduct research as part of this class, and you do a survey to find out what sort of food students prefer in the cafeteria at Burge, you could do that kind of research with, as long as it meets these 8 criteria that the course instructor can look at and say, yep, your study meets those criteria. You could do that research without IRB approval, mostly because the IRB feels like as long as your research information is not contributing to generalizable knowledge, it's not advancing the field of your scientific inquiry, it's just being done to learn how to do research, and that the data are only being used in the classroom. You're doing this project to learn how to conduct research for a course requirement, then you wouldn't need IRB approval. If you do that kind of project, you have to tell people certain form disclosures that it's research, that you're doing it as part of a class. You have to give them the instructor's name. You have to tell them that participation is voluntary. But then you're welcome to use that research to learn how to collect it, to analyze it, whatever you might do in a research methods class. And there's information posted on our website in the section under for faculty and staff and also for students. It's basically the same information with just a little bit of different focus that tells you about that policy and a checklist you can use to see if your study meets that requirement for course-related research. Otherwise, if it really meets the definition of human subjects research, you're going to need IRB approval for that. There is some flexibility in the federal regulations when it comes to informed consent. I mentioned that exempt research doesn't have to provide all of the basic information that's required for subjects in a research study. Your course-related research doesn't have to tell people all of the information that most research studies have to tell subjects. It looks like a lot. Some basic information that would be enough for that potential subject to decide whether or not to participate. If you think from the perspective of a subject, what would you want to know? You're going to want to know what you're going to be asked to do. How much time is it going to take? What are the risks? What are the benefits? Who do I call if I have questions? What's the purpose of this study? All of those are on the list of things that researchers have to tell subjects. And they have to tell them in a language that the subject can understand and in a manner that the subject is free to decline to participate if they don't want to participate. So the gold standard is tell subjects verbally about the study, give them something to read, let them ask questions, let them think about it, and have them sign a document. That's really the gold standard. Now there are some exceptions to that requirement. If you're doing a web-based survey, maybe it'd be inconvenient or even challenging to give subjects a paper consent document to sign. So there are some exceptions that allow the researcher to post all of the information in the consent document, but the subject just clicks a button and says, yep, I'm willing to do this, and clicks a button to move forward in the survey. So that's called a waiver of documentation of consent. The IRB can grant that waiver. The subject does not have to sign a document, but they still are receiving all of that basic information that lets them decide whether or not to participate. The IRB also has the option of fully waiving either one of the required elements, one or more required elements of consent, or completely waiving informed consent. For researchers that work with existing data that were collected for some other purpose or some past research study, maybe some old data that was gathered a long time ago, it may not be feasible or even possible to obtain signed informed consent from people who the information, they were students in the 1960s, for example, or something like that, and if you're looking back at historical data. Even if it has identifying information, the IRB might still be able to completely waive the requirement for informed consent. The IRB can also waive the requirement that the researcher tell subjects all of the required information. If you ever do research in the Department of Psychology. Sometimes they do research where if the subject knew the true purpose of the study, let's say it's a gambling study or a risk-taking behavior study, or some kind of study about, I don't know, what else they might need to not tell subjects the true purpose of the study. But if they told the true purpose, that might affect how subjects participate in the study. The IRB can waive the requirement for the subject to tell that purpose of the study. Usually there is some sort of debriefing or additional information provided to subjects at the end, so they're not kept in the dark completely. But there is some mechanism to do that research where they wouldn't have to tell subjects the true purpose of the study. Okay. So we made it through. Let me see if I covered. Oh, so I was going to talk a little bit about one of the questions that you guys submitted, somebody submitted, was about enrolling children in research studies. And I can't remember what the question was, if it could happen, or what has to happen for that. In the state, the University of Iowa policy is based on the state of Iowa definition of age of majority, or the age at which the child becomes an adult and able to make decisions for themselves. So for any research that involves children who are less than 18 years of age, the researcher must obtain consent. Typically, the researcher must obtain consent or permission from the parent or legal guardian of that child for the child to participate in the research. The assumption is that a child is not authorized to make that decision about whether or not to participate in research. There is an IRB policy that if you do research that goes on over a long period of time, and let's say you're enrolling teenagers and they could turn 18 at some point during your study, then there is a requirement to obtain consent once that minor reaches the age of majority. And so the study should have a mechanism built in, plans for obtaining that consent. Usually when there's a study of children, there is some question or some consideration about whether or not the child could express their own opinion about whether or not to participate in the research. And we call that obtaining assent from the child. That is that if the child is capable of making that kind of decision and the researcher proposes obtaining assent from the child, then whatever the child says goes. Even if the parent or the guardian says they want the child to participate or that they're okay with the child participating, if the child says no, the child does not participate in the research. Now there are some kinds of studies, usually not in social and behavioral research, but in biomedical research. Let's say we're talking about an oncology study of kids with cancer. Maybe you wouldn't want to leave the decision up to the child about whether or not they participate in a treatment study. And so there is the option for the IRB or for the researcher to propose not obtaining assent from a child to participate in research. Mostly, if it's possible to get assent from a child, the IRB would expect that would happen. And there are some differences, certainly if it's a child of 3-year-olds or 1-year-olds, maybe it wouldn't be appropriate to ask, do they want to participate in this research? They get up to 6 or 7, maybe you would ask them verbally if they want to participate, and they could just have a verbal answer. Maybe a little older, they could read a document, but maybe they wouldn't have to sign, or they would sign that says they agree to participate. Teenagers often could read a whole consent document and understand and make a decision about whether or not they want to participate. They can't legally give permission to participate, but they can give assent based on that information. So the last slide are resources that are available to you. Most of these point to places on our website that would be useful at some point for you when you're ready to do this. Our policies and procedures are posted right now actually in 2 different places. One is in this document that's listed on the slide called the Guide for Human Subjects Research at the University of Iowa. We're in the process of reevaluating and updating our documentation, and so that when we're shifting from this big PDF document into something called guidance ebooks that are posted on our website. So for now, some of the policies are in one place, some are in another. We're just in the process of shifting it over. We teach lots of classes on how to fill out the electronic applications every month, almost every month. 10 months out of the year, you could attend this 2-part series on how to fill out Hawkeye RP applications. We also give lots of other presentations as well. There are help messages in the Hawkeye RP application to help you in the moment figure out how to answer the questions in the form. We have an icon course. The portal for that is on our website, and our Hawkeye RP training sessions are recorded and posted in there. So if you want to watch them at 2 in the morning, you certainly could do that. We have a newsletter. We have a listserv that you can sign up for, or that newsletter is posted on our website if you want more information. You can check there. And the last really good resource we offer is our office hours. So during each semester, we have 3 different days a week that we offer 2-hour session of office hours. Twice a week, Wednesdays and Thursdays, they're in Hardin Library where our office is. Once a week, Monday mornings, actually going on right now, they are in the Linguist Center on the east side of campus. So feel free, if as the point where you're designing your project, if you have questions, the point where you're trying to fill out your Hawkeye RP application, if you have questions. These are drop-in office hours. You don't need any kind of appointment. We have computers available so you can log into Hawkeye RP and ask your questions. So do you have, I tried to flag the places where you had questions to incorporate them, but do you have other questions? There were other things on your list that I did not answer. I tried to cover as many of them as I could. So I am happy to answer questions as they come up. My contact information is here in the slides. You can also go directly to our main email or phone line to ask questions at irb@uiowa.edu. That's probably fastest, just in case I'm out of the office or something. So if I don't answer you right away, go to the main contact information there. So I wish you well in whatever research is in your future, and I'm happy if you do still have questions, let me know. I covered them all. That's good, because I told you everything I know. All right, thank you. Do you know how to stop that? We should have had her tell us how to stop that.
Are you recording? I'm nervous. Is it the red
Yes?
button?
Anybody know?
I don't want to delete it.
I don't want to delete it either. He showed her some button to push.
Is it this one or the red one? I don't know.
Oh, that's a good question. I would push the red one.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll do it.